Come on, big guy. Let's go for a ride. Let's cruise. Last week, I finished Christine by Stephen King, and this was not what I expected, but I really enjoyed myself. If you're somehow, at this point, unfamiliar with Christine by Stephen King, the plot's pretty straightforward on the surface, right? Arnie Cunningham, a 17-year-old boy who is like this total nerd loser, falls in love with a beat-up 1958 Plymouth Fury, and he begins to restore the car, but it turns out that the 1958 Plymouth Fury named Christine has a secret. And that secret is that it's a ghost car, baby, and it's got a taste for blood. And yeah, like that premise is super simple, right? It's like short story simple. And yeah, Stephen King, the mad lad that he is, decided to write a 600-page book on it. So going in this, I didn't know what to expect. I had never seen the movie, despite it being kind of a pop culture icon at this point. I'd never read the book. And besides, like, just the basic premise, I was very unfamiliar with where this story was going to go. But it turns out that Stephen King can just write anything. And he can write it super well, because Christine is not just a book about a murderous ghost car. It's also just an examination on what it's like to be a teen here in the United States of America. And I think if you've been to public school, public high school especially, and you've seen any of this, you will find this a very relatable story. You know, there were just parts of this, man, that I just connected to in a huge way. I can't say I had every single one of these things happen to me, but I could probably say I know someone who it happened to. And that is the thing about Stephen King as an author. He writes these characters and these stories in a way that is incredibly relatable, because even if you've never, for some reason, had a ghost car that loved murdering teenagers, you've probably at least, been in situation as a teenager and know what it's like to be awkward during that phase of life. Because this is a lot of different things. First of all, it's a lot of things you won't expect. There's like an entire crime thriller side story in this that is really well written. But it's also a teenage love story about, what's it like to fall in love for the first time as a teenager. What is it like to fall head over heels? There's also that connection between friends. I think especially if you're a man, you'll really connect with this story. If you're a woman, you'll connect with it too. But there is just something about the way King writes the two teenage leads in this story that I found relatable. I mean, I know I talked to my friends like this when I was 17. So I think, if you've been a teenage boy and you've hung out with other teenage boys, you'll find it very relatable. There was just a lot of great connections here in that way. And that's something that King does so well. He writes friendship in a very real and grounded way. And I love that aspect. I mean, this was a very moving story. And I had not expected that. I knew that King would deliver on this story, because obviously it was popular enough to get a movie. People seem to generally like Christine, maybe not as much as, stuff like It or The Stand or, The Shining or, one of his more popular tales. But, I've never heard anybody be like, oh, Christine's terrible. It's underrated, but I've never been told that it's bad. So going into this, I knew I would like it. But man, King delivered on just like every part of this story. Obviously, the ghost car and Christine are a really fun aspect, but that's only one part. There's like so many moving things. It's definitely an exploration of like what it's like to be in high school, especially as someone who is not popular, someone who has been picked on, someone who has been bullied, someone who's been harassed by other teenagers. And it shows you kind of how much it sucks to be a loser in high school. And I thought that was incredible, and, I was not bullied in high school or anything, but, I knew people who were, so I could, almost relate to it as I've seen this happen experience, if not a personal one. And that, again, that is just something King delivers on time and time again. Maybe you've never had a ghost car. Maybe you've never stayed at a hotel that was haunted. Maybe you've never, tracked down a Lovecraftian clown monster that feeds on fear. But you probably have, at least to some degree, experienced what it's like to be harassed by your fellow men and women. You've experienced, maybe not directly, but maybe indirectly, racism, or you've seen someone struggle with addiction, or you've seen someone struggle and cope with, becoming their own person. Maybe you've seen a friend or a family member deal with overbearing parents or deal with parents who do not get along. And that's just something that King does. He writes about these experiences that are not necessarily universal, but he writes about them in such a way that it's hard not to connect with them. They're stories that a lot of people can relate to, and I know I certainly can as a reader. This was a lot of fun. Honestly, Christine was a lot more fun than I thought it would, even though the premise is like super fun to begin with. This is 600 pages, but it flew by. I think I read this in like less than a week, and I probably would have read it in even less time if I had more time to myself. But yeah, this is great. This is everything. If you like Stephen King and you haven't read Christine, you're gonna love this. And if you haven't read Stephen King yet, this actually might be a great entry point. It's not like a super long book by him, and the horror elements are pretty on the low compared to some of his stuff. This is not The Shining level of scary. This is not Pet Sematary level scary. This is not It level scary. This isn't even Salem's Lot level scary. This is Ghost Car scary. It's a very silly premise that King writes in a serious way. And I think that this really shows off a lot of his strengths. It shows off how great of a character writer he is, because these characters are immediately relatable for how awkward and teenage they are. It shows off how great he is at building atmosphere, because the atmosphere is incredible in this. It shows how well he is at executing what other authors would be terrible at executing when it comes to premises, because there aren't many authors out there I could say that can write a ghost car story and I would take seriously, but King does. And I think it just shows how great of just a writer he is in so many other aspects. I mean, just words to paper, this man is incredible at what he does. I mean, he delivers this story, and and it's not like you're reading it and you're like, what do these words mean? Like, his stories are so readable, but he uses the English language in a way that is just like it just hits you. Like, he knows what he's doing. He's very good at wordcraft. He's very good at sentence structure. He's very good at building a paragraph. He's very good at building suspense. And he's good at getting you invested in these stories immediately. So, honestly, if you haven't read Stephen King, this might be a great entry point. I feel like this is one of his underrated works. And if you can get into this, you're probably going to be able to get into the rest of his stuff. I mean, this is just good at every level. This is great at pacing. This is great at characters. This is great at just the plot. This is honestly a really fun read. And I think by the end, you will have attached yourself emotionally to these characters and to the story that Stephen King wrote. Because I'll tell you, I'm not someone who tears up or gets emotional at the end of books, but the last chapter in this got to me. I teared up a little, genuinely. It connected in a huge way. So shout out to Stephen King for continuing to prove why I think he's my favorite author. If there was any doubt, it's been sealed away. This dude is just the best. He's the best in the business. And Christine was a lot of fun. 8.8 out of 10. Can't wait to read more.